Solomon, the king symbolizing wisdom, wealth, and contradiction, one of the most emblematic and complex figures in history. Solomon is widely recognized as one of the most prosperous rulers of all time and undeniably one of the richest men the world has ever known. In the biblical narrative, he not only ascends to the throne as a successor of his father, King David of Israel, but also stands out for his extraordinary wisdom and remarkable accomplishments, chief among them, the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem. Solomon's significance is so great that, although his name appears only in the final days of David, it is mentioned nearly 300 times in the Old Testament and at least 12 times in the New Testament. Beyond the sacred scriptures, Solomon's name echoes through non-biblical writings and intertwines with Jewish legends, which at times associate him with mystical and even obscure practices, such as alleged control over demons. However, the purpose of this exploration is to uncover the true story of Solomon, grounded in the Bible, and to delve deeper into the aspects that shaped his reign. Birth and youth, between intrigue and divine succession. King Solomon was the son of David and Bathsheba, the woman who had previously been the wife of Uriah. His birth took place during a time when David had already established his reign from Jerusalem. Interestingly, the Bible also refers to Solomon by the name Jedediah, which means beloved of the Lord, a title that reflects a special divine affection for him, even before his rise to power. Solomon would go on to rule over Israel for approximately 40 years, a long and impactful period estimated between 971 and 931 BC. Despite his future prominence, the scriptures are surprisingly silent regarding Solomon's early years. There is virtually no detailed information about his childhood or adolescence. However, based on what we know of David's complex family life, we can infer the kind of environment Solomon was raised in. With many wives and children, David's household became fertile ground for conflict and intrigue, often driven by the pursuit of status and power. Solomon enters the biblical narrative amid a moment of great tension within the royal family. David was old and physically weakened, and the struggle for Israel's throne was intensifying. Before Solomon, his half-brother Absalom had already attempted to usurp the throne, but failed. Later, Adonijah, the eldest surviving son of David, tried to repeat Absalom's actions, proclaiming himself king of Israel. Adonijah, a man of striking appearance and considerable popular appeal, secured the support of influential figures such as Joab, David's former general, and the priest Abiathar. He organized a coronation feast and made every effort to seize the throne. It was in this critical moment that Bathsheba, the prophet Nathan, the priest Zadok, and other allies acted swiftly. They reminded David of the divine promise yet to be fulfilled, that Solomon would be his rightful successor. Faced with the urgency of the situation and the threat posed by Adonijah, David gave the order for Solomon to be anointed and crowned king of Israel immediately, likely when he was no older than 18. This abrupt transition, marked by both divine and human intervention, reveals Solomon's predestined path to the throne, the consolidation of power and Israel's golden age. The reign of Solomon, which lasted for 4 decades, is a topic of debate among scholars regarding its exact chronology, but the majority lean toward a period between 971 and 931 BC. Shortly after the death of David, the young king Solomon, following his father's instructions, acted decisively to secure his position and dismantle any internal opposition. He ordered the executions of Adonijah and Joab, and the banishment of Abiathar, thus establishing a reign free of internal threats and consolidating his authority. Without question, Solomon inherited from David a vast territory of approximately 128,000 square kilometers. During his rule, he implemented significant improvements in Israel's domestic affairs. One of his first major administrative reforms was a replacement of the old tribal divisions with 12 administrative districts. Each district was overseen by an officer appointed by the king, responsible for supplying provisions to the royal court for 1 month each year. This system was designed to ensure a continuous and efficient supply chain to the capital. The daily provision list for Solomon's court was indeed immense. The account in 1 Kings, chapter 4, details quantities that some consider exaggerated, yet they were meant to sustain the entire royal establishment at its peak. These included 9,000 kilograms of flour, both fine and common, 30 oxen grain-fed and pasture-raised, 100 sheep and goats, along with deer, gazelles, roebucks, and well-prepared birds served as delicacies. Many scholars estimate that this quantity of food was enough to feed over 12,000 people daily, including officials, royal staff, and the king's extended household. Solomon's court was well-organized and extensive, with his high-ranking administrators referred to as princes, reflecting the grandeur and structure of his kingdom. In the military realm, Solomon also introduced significant advancements. He incorporated chariots and cavalry into the army, something relatively new for Israel at the time. Furthermore, he invested in the construction of new roads and the establishment of border fortresses to protect trade routes, which were essential to the kingdom's security and prosperity. However, the cornerstone of Solomon's reign was undoubtedly commerce. He not only controlled key trade routes, but also established strategic trading outposts that generated immense revenue. Silver became as common as stones in his kingdom, and cedar, a noble wood, was plentiful. This wealth allowed Solomon to live amid splendor never before seen in Israel. His diplomatic skill was also remarkable, ensuring that for most of his reign, Israel faced few military threats from foreign nations, ushering in an era of peace and prosperity. Solomon's first major trade agreement was with Hiram, king of Tyre. Under this agreement, Solomon annually paid the equivalent of 2,000 tons of wheat and 400,000 liters of pure olive oil in exchange for precious timber used in his ambitious construction projects. He also entered into contracts with Egyptian merchants for the trade of horses and chariots, which were then sold to the Hittites and Syrians at a profit. However, the most lucrative venture of King Solomon's commercial activities was maritime trade. His ships sailed the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea, reaching as far as Ophir, a region rich in gold and precious stones. These voyages could last up to 3 years and brought immense wealth into the kingdom. When considering the annual revenue from trade agreements, tolls on goods in transit, and taxes collected throughout his dominion, the estimated accumulation of wealth reaches an exceptional scale, cementing Solomon's status as one of the wealthiest men in the history of humanity. The grand constructions, the temple and the royal buildings. Of all the constructions carried out during King Solomon's reign, the building of the temple in Jerusalem was undoubtedly the most important and symbolic. In accordance with God's promise to David, Solomon was granted the honor of executing the project to build a temple that would house the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred symbol of God's presence among the people of Israel. To secure the labor force required for such a monumental undertaking, King Solomon resorted to forced labor, primarily from the Canaanite peoples who had been subjugated by Israel. However, the number of Canaanite workers proved insufficient to meet his ambitious construction plans. Faced with this shortage, Solomon made the controversial decision to conscript Israelites as well, subjecting them to a form of compulsory labor. This move was deeply unpopular and eventually led to public resentment, most notably reflected in the death of Adoniram, the superintendent of the labor crews, after Solomon's reign. The temple was strategically located on Mount Moriah, the same site where King David had once built an altar to the Lord, and earlier still, where Abraham is believed to have ascended with Isaac for the intended sacrifice, making the location doubly sacred. Although David had collected many materials for the construction of the temple, the actual building process began only in the 4th year of Solomon's reign. And while the structure may seem modest by today's architectural standards, approximately 27 meters long, 9 meters wide, and 13.5 meters high, it represented a truly grand enterprise for its time, built with the finest and most precious materials, tons of pure gold, precious stones, and noble woods like cedar and sandalwood, imported from Tyre and Ophir. Every detail, from the gold-plated interiors to the sacred furnishings and carved decorations, reflected the magnificence and devotion of a structure dedicated entirely to the worship of God. When the temple was completed in the 11th year of his reign, Solomon organized a massive celebration that lasted 7 days. During the dedication of the building, numerous sacrifices were offered and the glory of the Lord filled the temple, an event that profoundly marked the spiritual and historical identity of Israel. In addition to the temple, Solomon undertook other remarkable constructions throughout Israel, showcasing both his passion for architecture and his capacity for engineering. Among these, the following stand out. The House of the Forest of Lebanon, an impressive structure measuring 50 meters long, 25 meters wide, and 15 meters high, Renowned for its rows of cedar columns that resembled a forest, it served as both an armory and a venue for royal banquets. A portico of columns, measuring approximately 25 by 15 meters. This structure likely functioned as a grand entrance or reception area, adding to the architectural magnificence of the royal complex. A hall for his throne. This was the place where Solomon rendered judgment, an area of profound symbolism and authority, adorned with ivory and overlaid with gold, befitting the grandeur of his reign. A residence for Pharaoh's daughter, one of Solomon's wives. Her residence reflected significant political importance and was built with remarkable grandeur, emphasizing her role in diplomatic alliances. Solomon's own palace, a vast and luxurious construction, likely designed to accommodate his 700 wives, 300 concubines, and a multitude of servants required to maintain the splendor of his royal court. The Millo, a massive fortress, possibly an expansion or reinforcement of the original Jebusite stronghold in Jerusalem, constructed to defend the temple and the royal palace, ensuring the security of the capital city. All of these structures served not only practical and religious functions, but also stood as enduring symbols of Solomon's power, wealth, and the magnificence of his reign, leaving visiting dignitaries from all nations deeply impressed. The incomparable wisdom and its expression, as we know, beyond his wealth and magnificent constructions, King Solomon became immortalized for his incomparable wisdom. The Bible records a pivotal episode that illustrates the origin and nature of this wisdom. In a dream, the Lord appeared to Solomon and asked him what he most desired to receive. Solomon, then a young king, could have asked for even greater riches, longevity, honor, or the defeat of his enemies. However, the young king asked for wisdom, an understanding heart, to prudently govern his people, discern between good and evil, and administer justice. God was pleased with his request and, in addition to wisdom, also granted him unprecedented wealth and honor. One of the most famous biblical episodes highlighting King Solomon's wisdom is when two mothers appear before him, disputing over a single newborn. The case was extremely difficult, as there were no witnesses to determine the true mother. With his divinely granted wisdom, King Solomon proposed a drastic solution, that the boy be divided into two with a sword to settle the problem. Faced with the real possibility of her child's death, the true mother revealed herself by preferring to give the boy to the impostor woman, asking that he live, even if under the care of another. This demonstration of maternal love and sacrifice allowed Solomon to judge the case impeccably, revealing the true mother and solidifying his reputation as a wise judge throughout Israel. King Solomon's wisdom can also be seen in all the literature he produced. Solomon composed thousands of proverbs and songs, and the depth of his proverbs is impressive. The Bible recounts that he discoursed on trees, from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall, on animals, birds, reptiles, and fish, demonstrating an encyclopedic knowledge of nature. His wisdom was not limited to matters of government and morals, but encompassed knowledge of the natural world. Beyond biblical accounts, many ancient legends and documents refer to Solomon's spectacular wisdom. Among the books of the Bible, Solomon is attributed with authoring a large part of the book of Proverbs, the book of Ecclesiastes, which reflects on the vanity of life and the search for meaning, and perhaps the book of Song of Songs, an allegorical love poem. Additionally, at least Psalm 72 and 127 are also attributed to him. The Bible also narrates that Solomon's wisdom was so impressive that people from all nations and all kings of the earth came to hear his wisdom. One of the most notable visits was made by the Queen of Sheba, who came from the ends of the earth to personally hear King Solomon's wisdom. She asked many questions and riddles, testing the depth of his knowledge, and the king intelligently answered all her inquiries, leaving her completely impressed. On that occasion, the Queen of Sheba presented Solomon with many gifts, including spices, precious stones, and more than 4 tons of gold, a testament to the grandeur and fame of Solomon's wisdom. Problems and decline, the fall of a great king. Despite all the wisdom and wealth he possessed, King Solomon made decisions that brought him great problems and ultimately led to the decline of his reign and the division of the kingdom after his death. These actions represent a tragic irony for a king so renowned for his sagacity. One point of contention was the implementation of forced labor on the people, including the Israelites, for his grandiose constructions. While effective for his projects, this measure generated deep resentment among the population, especially among the northern tribes, who were most affected. His international trade practices, although a source of immense wealth, somehow facilitated the entry of idolatry into Israel, constant contact with other peoples and cultures, and the import of foreign products and customs opened the doors to the worship of pagan gods. He also imposed a heavy tax burden that overwhelmed the Israelites, creating discontent and a sense of exploitation, the peril of polygamy and idolatry. However, the main way false god began to be recognized in Hebrew territory was his intense polygamy. The Bible explicitly forbade a king in Israel from having many wives, lest his heart turn away from the Lord. Deuteronomy 17, verse 17. Solomon, however, greatly disregarded this ordinance. Solomon's marital life was marked by 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, an impressive number. All indications are that many of his marriages were part of political moves, used to solidify advantageous international agreements and ensure peace with neighboring nations. For example, the daughter of the Pharaoh of Egypt was one of his wives, and on the occasion of this union, Solomon received the city of Gezer as a dowry, although the Bible records that Solomon loved his wives, indicating that his relationships were not solely for strategic advantage. The plurality of foreign wives, who brought with them their gods and rituals, had a devastating impact. In his old age, Solomon himself was influenced by his many foreign wives and, tragically, practiced mixed worship, following other gods. He built altars for Molech and Chemosh, pagan gods, and worshipped them to please his wives. Some Arab, Jewish, and Ethiopian traditions suggest that Solomon also had a love affair with the Queen of Sheba, from which a son was supposedly born, reportedly the founder of the Ethiopian royal house. However, the Bible does not report anything about this, and it is important to stick to reliable biblical records. Solomon's heir, Rehoboam, was born from his marriage to Naamah, an Ammonite woman. Considering the period of Solomon's reign, 40 years, and the age of his son Rehoboam when he succeeded him, 41 years, we can conclude that Solomon's relationship with Naamah began even before his reign. Many scholars believe that Naamah may have been Solomon's first wife. Divine judgment and the kingdom's division. King Solomon's grave sin in confronting the exclusive worship of God in Israel by following other gods to satisfy his foreign wives could not go unpunished. The Bible says that God was indignant with Solomon. The truth is that the king, best known for his unimaginable wisdom and wealth, also experienced decadence and consequent divine disapproval because, ironically, he was not wise with the things of God and disregarded his ordinances. However, in his mercy and love for David, God suspended his total judgment during Solomon's lifetime and did not immediately take the kingdom from him. Nevertheless, even with the postponement of divine judgment during his life, Solomon experienced the threats of enemies whom God raised up to be instruments of judgment in his kingdom, such as Hadad the Edomite, Rezin, king of Damascus, and Jeroboam. Among these three opponents, Jeroboam has the greatest prominence in the biblical text. He was a strong and hard-working leader who rebelled against King Solomon's policies, especially those concerning taxes and forced labor. The prophecy of Ahijah, the Shilonite, revealed to Jeroboam that he would become king over 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel. Indeed, after Solomon's death, divine punishment was truly poured out upon his house, and the glorious united kingdom of Israel was taken from his son Rehoboam, resulting in the division of the kingdom. Jeroboam became the king of the northern tribes, Israel, and Rehoboam governed only over the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, Judah. The legacy and historical perception. The Bible doesn't provide many details about Solomon's death, only stating that he slept with his fathers. What we do know is that he ended his life melancholically, leaving behind a kingdom that was worn down and on the verge of collapse, a direct consequence of his spiritual failures. However, he undoubtedly made extremely important contributions to Israel. Solomon was the king who built the temple of the Lord, the central dwelling place for the worship of God. He was a king who consolidated Israel's position on the international stage of his time, transforming it into a respected and wealthy power. And he was a primary exponent of Hebrew wisdom literature, whose teachings continue to guide generations. Extra-biblical narratives and historical accuracy. As for the many extra-biblical stories about Solomon, There's no evidence whatsoever that they are true. While the Bible itself mentions the existence of records about Solomon, including some titled The Book of the History of Solomon, which served as sources for the biblical writer of 1st and 2nd Kings, these materials have been lost and no longer exist. What remains today are merely legends and fantastical writings, primarily produced by adherents of a more mystical branch of later Judaism. In these legends, Solomon is often depicted as being involved with magic, capable of controlling demons, and even conversing with animals. But these accounts are generally based on pseudepigraphical writings, works of unknown authorship, often falsely attributed to historical figures, that were likely produced in the medieval period long after the biblical events. Unfortunately, many people, without in-depth knowledge, prefer to believe in the veracity of these false works and reject what is actually recorded in the biblical text, which, whether people like it or not, is the most well-documented work of history concerning this period. It's common for some people to say that the true story of Solomon was hidden from the Bible, but this, of course, makes no sense at all, because these mystical stories about Solomon emerged long after the Old Testament biblical text had been compiled and established. Archaeology and the Messianic typology. Regarding archaeology, most archaeologists agree on the historicity of Solomon, although there's much debate about the extent and characteristics of his kingdom. Recent archaeological findings have increasingly contributed to our understanding of the period of the Israelite monarchy. However, excavations in the area where the temple stood, which is perhaps the most important for potential discoveries from Solomon's time, are always very problematic due to complex political and religious issues, which hinders the work. Therefore, what we truly reliably know about Solomon is what is recorded in the Bible. And the most important thing in all of this is to understand that all the glory and splendor of Solomon's kingdom merely typified the eternal kingdom of the Messiah. So much so that Psalm 72, attributed to Solomon, uses hyperbolic language to simultaneously refer to the human king and pronounce the divine king, who is Christ, whose reign of peace, justice, and prosperity will be without end.